Hey guys, so Taylor just dropped a lyric that has the internet asking, how is this relatable? And the second I read it in that mirror, I knew the comments were about to go nuclear. Not because of the words alone, but because of the timing, the place, and the way it was served like a wink from the top of the food chain. We're going to test the outrage tonight. Is this a real pulse from the fandom? Or a manufactured storm that only exists because the campaign needs friction? I'm going to pull the mirror message everyone's clowning, the collab that's fueling conspiracies, and the fame feels like a prison comparisons people keep throwing around. If this is just noise, we'll prove it. If it's a crack, we'll see how far it runs. Here's what happened. The album arrives with the confidence of a victory lap. Tour buses, studio all-nighters, 1,000 camera phones pointed at the same sparkly moment. The teasers feel like postcards from backstage. Lipstick on glass, orange lights, you had to be there, energy. And then, center stage, the line. Oftentimes, it doesn't feel so glamorous to be me. 14 words, a billion interpretations. It hits a billboard. It hits a phone. It hits your group chat. By the time the second echo fades, the thread count in the replies is already climbing, and the tone is set. Either she's being honest about the cost of spectacle, or she's cosplaying the struggle while counting commas in the bank. That's the split. That's the spark. Let me start by saying this. Both reactions can be true in the same minute. You can empathize with constant scrutiny and still think the framing is off. You can recognize that being watched for a living is a pressure cooker and still feel like that sentence reads like a sigh from a penthouse. That tension is exactly why this thing caught fire so fast. The line wasn't dropped into silence. It was dropped into a year of economic headaches and rent spikes and grocery receipts that somehow got heavier. So when one of the most visible people on Earth says, not so glamorous, the context isn't the same for everyone. For some, it's a glimpse behind the curtain. For others, it's tone deaf on. But the mirror line is only the opening move. The rollout stacks clues like dominoes, a title that dares you to ask who the showgirl is when the lights are off, cover art that reads like a diary page set in rhinestones, and a feature that people won't stop dissecting. The Sabrina moment matters because it isn't just a collab, it's a cross-current. Their audiences overlap in memes, in fashion, in the way they talk-sing a punchline, which means every line on that track will be picked apart with twice the intensity. Fans are already projecting styles onto each other. Who brought the wink? Who brought the knife? Who's borrowing whose cadence? Who's doing the meta-celebrity thing a little too loudly? It's not a duet so much as a prism. Tilt it one way and it's playful. Tilt it the other and it's a mirror staring back at fame itself. And that's where the second wave of criticism rolled in. Not just not relatable, but you've used this theme before. The behind-the-curtain narrative has been part of her toolkit for years. Reputation rebuilds, documentary confessionals, coded visuals you can pause and decode frame by frame. On this album, the motif returns with sequins and bubbles and a wink that says the party isn't always fun. Some heard growth, others heard a rerun. The pushback wasn't that she can't talk about pressure. It's that it felt like deja vu without the twist. When people say it sounds like a greatest hits of metaphors, spotlight glare, empty dressing rooms, the bathtub at midnight, they're not rejecting the truth of it. They're asking for a new lens. Meanwhile, the numbers are laughing at the drama. Streams explode, charts reset, sales do lapse, which is why the conversation keeps fracturing. If success is the scoreboard, she already won. But social media isn't a scoreboard. It's a coliseum. You can sell out the arena and still get booed in a comment section. That disconnect is modern pop in one sentence. The metrics can be historic and the mood can be sour because we're not measuring the same thing. One is volume, the other is vibe. So let's test the outrage like we promised. First, the mirror lyric. Why did it land like a brick? Placement, New York, bright lights, the center of capitalism. A sentence about glamour, stripped of the surrounding verse that maybe softens or flips it, turned into a billboard koan. Without chords or context, it reads like a mission statement on a skyscraper. That's a flex, even if it's not meant to be one. Second, timing. You can tell a hard truth and still misread the room if the room's exhausted. People aren't calculating metaphors. They're reading the vibe. She's everywhere. She's winning. She's smiling. And now she's telling us it doesn't feel glamorous. For some, that's humility. For others, it's a humble brag with glitter. Third, there's the audience's memory. Listeners don't arrive empty. They bring the last 5 eras with them. They bring old interviews. They bring screenshots of lines that felt raw and lines that felt rehearsed. When a new lyric grazes a familiar theme, fame hurts, trust breaks, love performs. Fans judge not just the sentence, but the innovation inside it. Does it deepen the thought or just decorate it? The answer decides whether a line gets framed on a wall or dunked on in a quote tweet. Now, the collab. People expected a spark because both artists are fluent in the same candy-coated sarcasm. That's one reading. The other reading is that the feature acts like a relief valve. It leans bright and breezy, while the rest of the record plays with mirrors. In that interpretation, the title track is the palate cleanser, not the manifesto. That nuance gets lost when you're only hearing a snippet on a loop at a pop-up. Snippets invite projection. We fill in the blank with whatever we want to argue about. And right now, the blank is being filled with words like tone-deaf, performative, and out of touch. Because those are the words the internet is primed to use when anyone famous expresses any kind of fatigue. There's also the microaggression discourse. Specific lines people are listing as digs at women who don't look like her, or at groups her friends align with, or at the idea of tough that seems borrowed from someone else's culture. Those critiques are serious, and they're coming from listeners who don't want to be told they're imagining it. At the same time, other fans are saying the bars are self-aware jokes, or a send-up of how she gets labeled online, or character voice. Both camps are talking past each other because they're arguing intent without context. Until the full verses are in the wild with official annotations or interviews that actually tackle the choices, this will stay a Rorschach test. That's the uncomfortable truth of pop in a clip-based economy, meaning gets crowdsourced before the song finishes loading. Let's zoom out. The outrage cycle isn't happening by accident. Her team knows how to throw breadcrumbs that taste like conversation starters. Mirrors, bathtub glam, backstage diaries. A tagline, you can love or roast in the same breath. The internet doesn't need permission, it needs a spark. You don't have to stand to share it. You don't have to hate to quote it. All you need is an opinion, and opinions are the one thing the timeline always has in bulk. So yes, some of this is organic frustration. And yes, some of this is the campaign doing its job so well that even the backlash is fuel. If you feel manipulated by that, you're not wrong. If you feel entertained by that, you're also not wrong. Pop can be two things. What about the fame is a prison line people keep tossing around? It's not new. Every superstar eventually reaches for it, and every time it lands differently. When you're climbing, it sounds like a prophecy. When you're reigning, it sounds like a grimace with a tiara on. The trick is not avoiding the topic. It's reframing it so it doesn't read as a sigh from Olympus. It's the difference between I'm trapped and here's the price no one sees. One is a complaint. The other is a case study. One invites eye rolls. The other invites empathy. The best albums find the seam where confession doesn't need a disclaimer. Let's walk through a day in this album's life to show you how the outrage breathes. Morning, a lyric leak hits a fan page with a blurry photo. Noon, a thick piece thread wraps the sentence in a paragraph of context that may or may not match what's on the record. Afternoon, creators react, stitch, and rate the line out of 10 with edits that make it look doomier. Evening, the track drops on a late-night playlist, and the full verse reframes the teaser so half the arguments feel slightly off, but they're already viral, so they keep moving. By midnight, you've got a cycle that feeds itself. Anyone jumping in feels like they're drowning in takes. That's when manufactured gets thrown around. And it's not entirely unfair. Rollouts today are built to generate discussion in layers, and confusion is sticky. If people are confused, they're still talking. Okay, so what does the feature actually do to the plot? Two things. It softens the edges by injecting charm, and it sharpens the knives by inviting comparison. Audiences will decide who delivered the standout moment, even if the song never intended a competition. That's how collabs work in a hyper-competitive ecosystem. The upside is obvious: a broader audience and a new flavor. The downside is the scoreboard in the comments, which is ruthless on a slow Tuesday. If that scoreboard decides the guest carried the chorus, the narrative becomes, did she just get outshined? If it decides the host steamrolled the vibe, the narrative becomes, why bring a guest to the party? It's rigged in the sense that someone will call it a loss either way. The only win is replay value. If it's sticky, the complaints turn into karaoke lines in 2 weeks. Now let's get into the maturity argument. People age, art evolves. If your lyric book still lives in homerooms and hallway drama, when you're past 30, some listeners will check out, even if the rhyme is clean. That doesn't mean you can't revisit youth. It means the angle needs a layer the old songs didn't have. Nostalgia plus insight beats nostalgia alone. When critics say they want more than dance floor therapy, they're not demanding a thesis statement. They're asking for a reason to underline the line. When fans say, "We like the glitter, stop asking for homework," they're defending the right to joy. Those two wishes are not enemies. A great pop record can make your heart race and your brain light up. Here's the counter-argument you'll hear from defenders. The album isn't trying to be a think piece, it's trying to bottle adrenaline, backstage, bright lights, laughter that doesn't end. If the mirror line sounds heavy, it's the exception, not the goal. The point is movement, not meditation. If you buy that, then the outrage is a category error. The critics are dissecting a confetti cannon and asking why it didn't become a novel on the way down. But even if that's true, the mirror line still lives online as its own object, without the cushioning of melody and sequence. That's the problem with teasers. They become tattoos the music can't remove. Let's talk about the fan split, because it's real, and you can measure it in how people share. You've got the stans who frame the lyric as brave, finally admitting the cost without asking for sympathy. You've got the skeptics who think it reads like a diary entry left out on purpose to spark exactly this conversation. And you've got the neutrals, who say the song will decide. That last group matters. They're not married to either camp. They predict whether this becomes a scandal or a speed bump. If they hear the track and feel the verse earns the line, the heat dies down. There's a conversation around political adjacency too. Who she's seen with, how carefully she words support, how she frames "I like my friends," when those friends are attached to bigger labels. Listeners who live inside those labels, who feel the consequences of policies in their daily life, watch tone like a hawk. When lyrics brush against those tripwires, it's not petty to scrutinize them. It's self-defense. That's why these debates burn hotter than the usual stan wars. We're not just arguing about rhymes. We're arguing about representation and the weight of being the biggest voice in the room. Even if she never intended to speak for anyone, the megaphone does its own math. Is any of this manufactured? Here's the most honest answer you'll get tonight. The campaign designed the maze. We chose to run through it. The mirrors are placed where they'll catch the most light. The billboards are tall for a reason. The pop-up has a quote that photographs well. That's engineering. But no one can manufacture your reaction. They can only set the trap. If you felt annoyed reading a lyric on a 20-story screen, that was real. If you felt seen, that was real. The algorithm doesn't care which feeling you had. It cares about the fact that you had one loud enough to post. So where does this go from here? If the album's second wind brings context in the form of interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, or an acoustic performance that reframes intent, the heat will cool. Transparency always dilutes outrage because it makes the vague specific. On the flip side, if the next teaser doubles down on the same theme without adding layers, the critics will keep calling it self-mythologizing. The fastest way to change a narrative is to give people a new scene to talk about, a surprise visual, a lyric that answers a question without sounding like a press release, a bridge that flips the thesis. One moment can reroute a timeline in a weekend. There's one more piece of this that no one wants to admit because it ruins the fun. We drag what we're addicted to. If she weren't omnipresent, the lyric wouldn't have mattered. If she weren't a machine at turning private emotion into public artifacts, the mirror message would have felt like a note in a diary no one read. Her superpower is also the lightning rod. She makes you care enough to pick a side before the chorus arrives. That's the secret of the era. Every new rollout tests how much cultural bandwidth she still owns. Today's answer is a lot. The only question is whether she spends it on empathy or spectacle. And yes, sometimes the sneaky trick is that the spectacle becomes the empathy, saying out loud that the costume weighs something, then showing the seam where it digs in. If you're still undecided, here's the test I use. Ask yourself 3 questions after the first full listen. Did the song make me feel something before I read what everyone else felt? Did the lyric land differently inside the verse than it did on the billboard? And did any line cut deep enough that I wanted to play it again with my eyes closed? If you hit yes on 2 out of 3, The outrage becomes background noise. If you hit no on all three, the criticism stands and the campaign has homework. I promised at the start we'd decide whether the backlash is real or manufactured. Here's my verdict after all the receipts. The frustration is real, and it's rooted in context, not envy. People are tired. They want their stars to show the work, not just the wear. They want the not glamorous line to open a door, not close a curtain. They want proof inside the melody that you know how it sounds when bills pile up. That's not a demand that every pop song become a policy paper. It's a request for a tone that feels like it belongs to the moment. And when the moment is rough, glitter needs teeth. At the same time, the manufactured part is undeniable. The staging was built for maximal reaction. The city, the mirror, the color story, the sequencing, the feature drop at a precise point in the cycle. It's smart, it's strategic. It's also why the criticism hit the exact targets it did. The maze led us there. But it didn't tell us how to feel when we arrived. We brought that ourselves. So here's where we land. The album is a high-gloss ride that stops every now and then to peer into a mirror and ask whether the costume still fits. The lyric that started the fire might be the most honest sentence on the project, or the most misread one, depending on what you needed to hear when you saw it. The feature is either a sugar rush or a decoder ring, depending on where you stand. The discourse is loud because the stakes are high, and the stakes are high because she still matters enough to ignite a timeline on a Tuesday with a sentence and a smirk. Give it one full listen, alone, on the commute, no comments, no charts, no billboards. Then decide what the line means to you. If it still feels off, you're not a hater. You're a listener with a boundary. If it hits differently in sequence, if the verse softens the blow, if the bridge explains the bruise, then maybe the internet skipped the part where the song did its job. Either way, the story isn't finished tonight. Pop eras don't end with backlash. They end with a moment that makes the noise go quiet. Sometimes that moment is a live performance where the lyric finally sounds human. Sometimes it's a video that reframes the character. Sometimes it's a new single so undeniable that everyone forgets what they were arguing about last week. Until then, hold both truths in the same hand. The lyric rubbed people the wrong way, and the machine did exactly what it was built to do. It turned friction into fuel. Whether that fuel powers a long, triumphant runway or a turbulent landing is the suspense we'll be living in for the next few weeks. And you already know how this works. Every stream, every share, every side eye is a vote. Fans are listening. So are we.